This show is part of the HeadStuff podcast network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cullen, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grainne wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the trooping and solitary, and ghosts who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Puka fireside, the Marrow fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore and mythology, we retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. O'Lahan. I am your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 142 of Fireside. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we continue our look at the Mabinogion with the three Welsh romances of Arthurian legend. This is our final tale of Peredur. This is the story of Peredur and the Fortress of Wonders. But first, a very big welcome to any new and returning listeners. Please do follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. And if you really want to support the podcast, you can do so over at HeadStuffPodcast.com, where you can join HeadStuff Plus, where for as little as €5 a month, although you can pay more if you want, you can gain access to not just bonus material for Fireside, but for all of the podcasts on the HeadStuff Podcast Network. And I want to let you know, there is still the latest piece of bonus material up there is my interview with Mark Williams, author of Ireland's Immortals, and there's plenty of other stuff there building each and every month as a members only exclusive. But that's over on HeadStuff Plus if you really want to support it. But of course, the Patreon is still also there for those who've been listening or catching up, because HeadStuff Plus has only been around for the last not even a year yet. And we've actually had two brand new patrons over on patreon.com. So I want to give a big thank you to Madeline Oliver and to Davey McCown for joining over on Patreon. The Patreon is not going anywhere for those who still support over on there. I'm very, very deeply grateful for any new and continued support over the last 3 years of Fireside. I am coming to you, as I record this evening, I am coming to you from Wales. I have actually gone to the land of the Mabinogion, to the land of Welsh mythology, because I'd never been, and the opportunity presented itself. Those who've been listening for the past even few months will know that I was meant to still be away in Australia, and one of the main reasons I was adapting the Mabinogion at this time was because I was going to be away for a long time, and it was going to be a nice thing to focus just exclusively on for a period of a few months. But that tour was cut short and postponed until next year, so I found myself back in Ireland. So I spent some time. I spent a couple of weeks staying with my friends, and I've had a bit of a nomadic feeling in me, and I've been finding it difficult to settle and readjust back home. So I've kind of been wandering around a bit, and I became drawn more and more to Wales because, as I said, I've never been, and I wanted to bring more of a sense of authenticity to adapting these stories. And as I'm back on this side of the planet, I decided to seize on the opportunity. So I'm at the base of the Preseli Mountains, the Preseli Hills, here in what was the Kingdom of David. I've come to the land of Pulch, Prince of David. Narbeth, which is where he was to have ruled from, is about 10 kilometers south from here. I'm really, really right in the dents. I'm staying in a moor shed overlooking a moor. It is miles away from everything, and it feels like the perfect place to continue and possibly even finish adapting the Mabinogion. So I'm going to really be working hard over the week that I'm here to try and get as ahead of myself as possible to really try and get towards the end, leading up to about the 150th episode of Fireside in 8 episodes' time, where I want to move on to something else. I have a good, nice plan for the 150th episode, which is going to bring us back to Ireland's shores, but I really want to explore and make the rest of the Mabinogion as good as it can be, and it's brilliant. It feels so right and fantastic to be recording this from Wales, to have been writing and adapting and recording these stories of Welsh mythology in the land itself. So, and thank you so much to all of the HeadStuff Plus and the Patreon supporters, because it's through your support over there that has allowed me to do this kind of research and field trips such as this. But that's all by the by. That's a good context for you to know that I'm actually recording this story in the land where it should be. But the story for this week is our final story of Peredur, who has been the last 4 stories. It is by far the longest tale in the Mabinogion. There are others that are nearly as long, but this has been a mammoth to adapt, one of the hardest stories to adapt in the entire history of Fireside, because it falls into different subcategories and into sub-stories, which make for a more tricky adaptation, even though the breaks and the breadths seem quite natural, particularly in this one. But I'm looking forward to now, after this, the next few will be quite self-contained once off. They're one story in the Mabinogion and there'll be 1 episode, so that'll be nice. But I'm very much looking forward to this one, to round off this story of Peredur. This is the story of Peredur and the Fortress of Wonders on Fireside. Peredur and the Fortress of Wonders. Arthur was at his court, and his entire retinue was gathered there with him. At the table were Owain, Gwalchmai, and of course, Peredur. An older woman with black and curly hair entered the court on a yellowed mule. Her skin hung loosely off her bony and high cheekbone face. Her clothes were baggy and tattered, and her hair looked as if she had fallen out of a tree. The mule didn't look much better, or, in a way, couldn't have looked more suitable for its rider. It was sturdy, as all mules are, and just as well too, for it looked as if it would otherwise hardly be still standing. The rider gripped the old and worn leather reins of the mule and greeted Arthur and his court. Then she turned to Peredur and said, "Peredur, I will not greet you or offer you respect. Indeed, fate was blind when she gave you talent and fortune. When you came to the court of the lame king, and when you saw the young man with the sharpened spear, and from the tip of the spear a drop of blood streamed down until it spilled on the youth's wrist, you did not question the meaning or cause of that, or any of the other wonders that you saw. If you had, the lame king would have recovered his health, and the kingdom would be at peace. Instead, we are in a state of conflict and combat. Knights have died, wives have been widowed, and young girls unprovided for, and all of that is because of you." With that, the maiden on the mule set off. Peredur was absolutely dumbfounded. He had no idea what this woman had been talking about. He had been on many adventures at this point, and never remembered a lame king or a spear dripping blood. Or at least he never remembered a spear miraculously dripping blood of its own accord. Peredur set off from Arthur's court to solve the mystery of the Fortress of Wonders. He travelled for a long time, and one early morning Peredur could see a rider coming in the distance. The rider had the clothing of a priest, and Peredur asked him to give him his blessing. "Indeed, I will not bless you for wearing your armour on such a sacred day as this." "What day is it?" asked Peredur. "Why, it is Good Friday." "I do beg your pardon, father. I have been travelling for an entire year, and I did not know what day it was." So Peredur dismounted his horse, removed his armor, and walked from there, holding the bridle of his mount. Eventually the young knight came to a fortress where he once again met the priest. The priest welcomed Peredur, and the knight rested there that night. The next morning Peredur attempted to leave, but the priest asked him to stay for one more night. The next day, when he tried to leave again, the priest said, "Today is not a good day for travelling. You will stay with me today, and tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and then I will give you what information I have for what it is you seek." It was this fourth day where Peredur again asked permission to leave and begged for information about the Fortress of Wonders. The priest said, "When you leave here, you will come to a mountain. Cross it. On the far side of the mountain there is a river, and in the river valley there is the court of a king. And if you are able to get news of the Fortress of Wonders anywhere, it will be from him." So Peredur set out, crossed the mountain, came to the river valley, and met a number of men going hunting. Peredur looked for the one who was chief among them. He identified the king of the river valley, who welcomed Peredur and said, "Sir, I will give you two choices. Come hunting with me, or go to my home. My daughter will greet you there, and give you food and drink until I myself return from the hunt, and then we will talk and carouse into the night." Peredur said, "Thank you, Lord. I will gladly go to your home to rest." So the king ordered a short, yellow-haired lad to escort Peredur back to his court. There Peredur met the king's beautiful young daughter, who made the knight feel right at home. Everything Peredur said, the maiden laughed at. It made the short, yellow-haired lad suspicious and jealous. When the king returned from the hunt, the young lad went to him and said, "Lord, Peredur and your daughter are lovers." "What? How can you be sure?" asked the king. "I promise you, Lord, I can tell. If they are not lovers already, they will be before long, unless you do something about it." "What shall I do?" "Set some brave men upon Arthur's knight and imprison him until you know for sure." The king set men on Peredur to seize him and lock him up. The daughter of the king went and asked her father why Peredur had been imprisoned. "God knows why," said the king, "and he will not be released tonight or tomorrow or the day after tomorrow." The maiden did not question her father further. Instead, she went to the prison where Peredur was. The daughter made Peredur's prison cell as lavish as any room in the fortress. There were bards to sing songs, and the maiden stayed with Peredur all night. The next morning the young knight could hear a loud commotion coming from the nearby town. "What is all that noise?" he asked the maiden. "My father's host and his army are all riding into the town today. There is an earl nearby in control of 2 earldoms. He is as strong as a king, and there will be a battle between them both today." Peredur said, "I want you to arrange a horse and an armor for me. I will join the fight today, and promise to return to my prison cell before the day is done." The maiden arranged all of this for Peredur, and that day he rode out in a pure red cloak over his armor with a yellow shield in his hand. He overthrew every one of the earl's men who approached him that day, and that night he returned to his prison cell. The maiden asked Peredur how he got on that day, but the knight would not speak a word about it. The daughter then asked her father who the best fighter had been that day. "I do not know his name, but he wore a red cloak and a yellow shield." The daughter was ecstatic. For the following 3 days Peredur killed the earl's men and returned to his prison cell before anyone noticed he was gone. On the 4th day, Peredur killed the earl himself. The maiden went to her father to ask for news. Her father said, "The earl has been killed, and I now rule both of his earldoms." "Who killed him, lord?" his daughter asked. "The unknown knight in the red cloak with the yellow shield." "Lord, I know who he is. He is the very man whom you imprisoned." The king went to Peredur and released him from his prison cell. He held a feast for Peredur that night, where the young knight was offered the hand of the king's daughter and half of his kingdom. But Peredur said, "I did not come here for lands or love. I came to find the location of the Fortress of Wonders." The king said, "If you follow the road of the mountain, you will come to a lake, and you will see a fortress within the lake, and it is known as the Fortress of Wonders. We know nothing of these wonders, but know that that is what it is called." And so Peredur finally came to the Fortress of Wonders, and inside he found a chessboard. And the pieces of the chessboard were playing against each other. No players, the pieces moving of their own accord. Peredur found himself drawn into the game and fell behind the black pieces. When the white pieces won the game, Peredur was infuriated. He took the pieces in his lap and threw the board away. It was then that the black-haired maiden who had come to Arthur's court entered the room. "Shame on you, Peredur, for throwing away my mistress's chessboard. She would not have parted with that for all of her kingdom." "Is there no way of retrieving it to earn her friendship?" said Peredur. "There is one way. Go to the fortress of Mabinogion and fight the black-haired man who lives there. Every day he torments these lands. Defeat him, and you will retrieve the chessboard and my mistress's trust." Peredur went to the fortress and fought the black-haired man, who soon cried for mercy. Peredur gave the man his life in exchange for the chessboard. But when Peredur returned to the Fortress of Wonders, the black-haired maiden said, "You spared his life, after I told you that he torments these lands daily? He must be defeated permanently." So Peredur went back to the fortress of Mabinogion and killed the black-haired man. His next challenge was to go into the woods and defeat a mighty stag with one long horn the length of a spear. Peredur had been told by the black-haired maiden that this stag was terrorizing the lands, destroying the ecosystem. The black-haired maiden sent with Peredur a lapdog to lure the stag out. Peredur let the mighty beast sprint past him and with one swipe cut off the stag's head. The lapdog then ran to an approaching woman on horseback. Peredur thought she must surely be the mistress of the Fortress of Wonders. The mistress took the stag's head and said to Peredur, "Why did you kill the most beautiful jewel in all my land?" "I was told to," cried Peredur. "If I have wronged you, tell me how I may earn your friendship." "There is one way. You must go to the hillside, where there is a bush, and at the base of the bush there is a slab. Stand on that slab and challenge men to fight you 3 times. Then you will have my friendship." Peredur went to the slab, and a black-haired man with rusty armour arose on a scraggy horse. Peredur challenged the man to fight. Twice Peredur flung the man from his horse, and twice the man climbed straight back on. The third time Peredur drew his sword, and the man disappeared. Peredur kept on his way until he came to another fortress. Inside he met an old, decrepit, grey-haired man, and there was also a yellow-haired youth who approached Peredur. "Lord, it was I who came to Arthur's court disguised as the black-haired maiden. I am your cousin, and this is your uncle. We have been tormented and terrorized by the witches of CXLII. It was foretold that you would come to defeat them. The hardships and the challenges I charged you with were all to ensure that you were in top form for this greatest of battles. Peredur knew these witches. He had defeated one before. These witches were the ones who had trained him in weapons and chivalry. Peredur sent for Arthur and the rest of his retinue. Peredur watched as the witches killed one of Arthur's men. He asked them to stop. Then the witches killed a second of Arthur's men. Again, Peredur asked them to stop. When the witches of Caerlow killed a third of Arthur's men in front of Peredur, the young knight took his sword and struck the head witch on top of her helmet, so that her helmet, her armour, and her head split in two. The other witches realized it was Peredur who was fated to kill them, and fled with their lives, never to return. And that is the last story that is told of Peredur. And that is what is told of the Fortress of Wonders. To be continued. Folks, as you all know, Fireside is a proud son of the HeadStuff podcast network, which is Ireland's largest network of independent podcasts and a loving home for the creative and indeed the curious. There are so many other podcasts I could recommend to you on the network, some of which inspired me to approach HeadStuff myself. Here's a taste of one you might enjoy.
Come on, sissy that pod, let's get sickening!
Are you a fan of the Emmy award-winning show RuPaul's Drag Race?
Do you think about Roxy Andrews at the bus stop?
And do you belong in Party City?
Well, Sissy That Pod is the podcast for you. Join me, James, and my co-host, Cian,
Is there something on my face?
as we chat weekly about the runway realness, sickening shade, and backstage buffoonery.
That's right, whether it's new episodes of Drag Race US, UK, or All-Stars, Sissy That Pod will spill the tea with a new episode for you within 24 hours.
So make good choices and subscribe to Sissy That Pod from the HeadStuff Podcast Network, and we'll leave you gagging on our eleganza.
Now, let the music play!
And that is the story of the Fortress of Wonders, and that is the final story of Peredur on Fireside, and I hope you all enjoyed it. A very strange tale to end things with, especially with how perfectly structured and satisfying, relatively speaking, the last story of Peredur and the Serpent of the Cairn was, compared to this. This was a difficult and challenging one to untangle, so I hope it was as clear as can be. As always, I like to say these versions to be as clear as water, but just to even speak through them, to speak through the story is always to let you know what my understanding and my journey through it was. First of all, a major change I had to make was that there is essentially a subplot to this story featuring Gwalchmai, one of Arthur's other knights. Gwalchmai and Peredur set out from Arthur's court together. The black-haired maiden does not insult Gwalchmai like she does Peredur, but Gwalchmai decides to go with him anyway. And they reach this point where they split off, and Gwalchmai goes off on his own adventure. But Gwalchmai has his own set of challenges that are totally unfulfilled. He requests these challenges, and then it just says, and that is all the more that is told there. And then Gwalchmai just happens to be in the Fortress of Wonders at the end of the story. So you're just expected... It would be fine if it was a supporting character in a movie and you saw this beginning section and then he was just there at the end. You might not question too much what he got up to. You would just assume, okay, I guess he got what he wished. But it seemed to be of no consequence and just quite unsatisfying for the sake of this story. So it was just as simple to eradicate Gwalchmai from it entirely and make it clear in that regard. But what's quite frustrating or confusing to a degree, and sometimes this just happens with mythology where you just have to accept things as they are, and that is this yellow-haired youth, this yellow-haired youth who was in the guise of the black-haired maiden. He comes in the form of a woman, insults Peredur, says he must, and doesn't even say what he must do, just insults him and leaves. and leaves it up to Peredur to decide that he must find this Fortress of Wonders, which I keep calling Fortress of Solitude, which is where Superman has his lair, which is where Jor-El speaks to him. But I've even, like, in my script for this, I've typed Fortress of Solitude several times and had to change it back to Fortress of Wonders. Or Castle of Wonders, it is called in some versions of the story. But Peredur goes on all of these challenges where he goes and he is imprisoned falsely and then has to complete all these tasks, such as defeating this giant, retrieving this chessboard, defeating this stag, meeting this woman who may or may not be the mistress of the Fortress of Wonders herself, and then eventually coming to this castle where he meets this old man. And there's just kind of no explanation for any of it. There's no reason why the black-haired maiden came and was so specific, talking about this lame king and the spear dripping blood. This yellow-haired lad just says, oh, it was me all along, and it's actually witches. It's witches that are terrorizing us. So it was me who kind of gave it the addendum that these were all to prepare Peredur for this greatest of challenges. But it's also strange in that we have all of this time dedicated to the journey. As I said before, in these stories, it is far more about the journey than it is about the action or the climax. You know, our minds are so conditioned to big battle scenes, particularly from movies, which I suppose a nice comparison to is always with the novels versus the books of Lord of the Rings. In the books, Helm's Deep is barely a chapter; it's only a page or two. Whereas naturally in the movies, it's an over an hour long action sequence, which is just the differences in the mediums. But here we have that where so much time is dedicated to this journey of Peredur, and then when it actually gets to it, the big reveal that it's the witches of Caerlow, who we have met in the very first story of Peredur, which was it was a witch of Caerlow who Peredur defeated in this exact same way by hitting her on the head with his sword and smashing her helmet open. It was her who taught Peredur chivalry and weaponry and horsemanship. And it is these witches that now he fights again. But very little time, even in the versions that both the Mad Addis audiobook and the Oxford Oral Classics text, they have about 5 or 6 lines. They have a very small paragraph dedicated to Peredur sending for, and Gwalchmai as it is in those versions, sending for the rest of Arthur's court, them coming, the witches killing 3 of Arthur's men, Peredur telling them to stop, then him smashing open the head of the head witch, and then the rest of the witches fleeing. And that is what is told of the Fortress of Solitude, or the Fortress of Wonders. And that is what wraps up. There's nothing to say. That's the end of Peredur, which I suppose there doesn't necessarily have to. Perhaps he lived a normal life in the rest of his time, maybe eventually settle back down with his wife. But there is nothing to kind of wrap it up in the same way that there is in the 4 branches of the Mabinogion, which are very much centered around Pulch, his wife Rhiannon, and his son Pryderi, and that entire family. And we get the lives and the deaths of essentially all of the characters who feature therein those stories. But not so here. The most time is dedicated to Peredur across these 4 tales, or this one mammoth tale if you're reading it in text. And then just it ends as it does. I suppose this immortalizes Peredur in one way, and I'm sure there are many, many other stories of Peredur in folklore and legend and myth, but these were just the collection that formed the Mabinogion version and immortalized Peredur in the literary canon, our Percival as he is in the Chrétien de Troyes. That's it. I very much have enjoyed my time with Peredur. He is a real knight's tale, and he has been a very fun person and very challenging character to adapt. There is only one other story that features him in the Mabinogion that's kind of like a mini story that had the maiden who gave him the stone in exchange for his love, his promise of his love, and disappeared after when he had to fight the Serpent of the Cairn. There is a little story of him going and meeting her and marrying her, but when there was an entire story dedicated to him finding his love and he's offered the hands in marriages of so many daughters and so many maidens, and which he always refuses and say, I didn't come here for love or lands, I came here because I'm on a mission. It just seemed to undermine all of that to have just one small tale of him having this totally other marriage. But I will, as always, I will let you know that that story exists if you want to read it yourself. It just wasn't enough to dedicate a whole story to. It didn't fit with any other stories, and it was just a bit unsatisfying for me. So while this final tale was challenging and difficult, it was still very important as the end of these, because the end is the end. It's where these stories end in the text. So this is where the story of Peredur ends on Fireside. But with that, I will wrap things up. I hope you all enjoyed it, this final tale of Peredur. Next week, we have a story called The Dream of Emperor Maxen, another story from the Mabinogion that tells the tale of an emperor of Rome, which actually has very strong and very satisfying similarities to The Dream of Engus, which again just feels like this is all in the same world. These are all coming from the same source. But that will be next week, so please follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com. Support over on HeadStuff Plus. The link is in the description. Or support over on patreon.com if that more suits you yourself. I will be recording a few of these episodes while I'm here, so we'll be getting ahead of ourselves. I'll see you all. You'll hear me all next time. And remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the HeadStuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with HeadStuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.